Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Shed Share. This is where we have the opportunity to hear from LIC experts around aspects of our business. So this morning's Shed Share is around LIC Genetics, and it's my pleasure to have online with us this morning Taylor Connell, who is one of our genetics product specialists. All right, what are we going to be hearing about today? So Taylor's going to bring us up to date with the latest and greatest in the LIC genetics space. He'll touch on the LIC new genomics tool, cover off sex semen, and talk a little bit about this year's Premier Sires team. So a bit more about Taylor. So upon graduating from Massey University, Taylor joined LIC as a sire analyst. In this role, his main responsibility was to assist in breeding and buying the bulls for LIC's sire proving scheme. Early last year, Taylor moved into his current role as a genetics product specialist, where he assists in the development and marketing of LIC's genetics products, helping farmers pull the various herd improvement levers and manages the selection of bulls for LIC's bull teams and catalogue. Taylor also enjoys continuing to be involved with his family farm, often milking a few times a week, and of course selecting the best cows for the farm's breeding program. So super grateful to have Taylor available to join us this morning, and online to help support and monitor the chat function. We have Rachel Bloxham, who is our herd improvement technical manager, and we also have Charlotte Gray, who is our beef product specialist. So without any further ado, over to you, Taylor.
Cool, thanks for that, Joss, and welcome everyone. Great, so we'll kick off. So we'll give a bit of an update on genomics. So this has been quite a key thing for LIC, more so in the last couple of years. And last year saw us update to a newer version, if we want to call it that, of our genomic tool. So some pretty exciting stuff going on there. We'll talk a little bit about the differences in BW. We've had a few queries about this, just that we're seeing in the industry. So we'll touch on that briefly. Sex semen, this is the talk of the town at the moment. So especially our fresh liquid product that goes out in winter and spring, and also touch on the frozen sex semen that we are offering this year through our Alpha catalogue. And then finally cover off A2. And of course, everyone knows about that and where that has been going and the popularity that has been gaining. So we'll kick into it and we'll start off with genomics. So we'll start off with just a little bit of a background. So genomics was first released by LIC back in 2008, but since then there have been some substantial improvements that have been made to our genomic tool, like I was saying. So last year, we sort of upgraded the current version of our genomic tool after a lot of our work and investment into R&D, combined with improvements to the base model that was sort of helping calculate BW. This allowed the genomic information to be used in a more efficient way and provide greater accuracy in the genetics evaluation system, which of course flows through to helping us and helping you as farmers make better selections for your animals to breed from. So what we've got here, previously genomic data was removed when a bull received his daughter proof. As of February 2020, so when this new genomic tool came in, genomic information will remain and will continue to add data to an animal's evaluation. Now, we will touch on this a little bit further on in the presentation, and we'll dig into this a little bit more. Genomic information will therefore last the lifetime of the animal, contributing significantly to those traits, such as longevity and fertility, which do take a bit longer to gather records. But that is just a quick snapshot of where we've come from and where we are now. So this slide here is basically, it's one of those slides that talks 1,000 words. This is what I like to call the genomic tree. So basically what this looks at now is our new genomic tool. We talked about how all animals will have a proportion of genomics in their BW, and this is why. So even animals that haven't had a sample taken from their ear, they will still have a proportion of genomics. And that is because, maybe their sire has brothers, sisters, other sons, other daughters that are being genotyped. Basically, anywhere that you can think there's a link, there will be a link. And you can see that just with this in front of us here, that there are links just everywhere throughout the different animals on database. And that's why that all these animals, or all animals now, do have an element of genomics. Some will have a little bit more, some will have a little bit less. Obviously, those ones that have had an actual sample taken from their ear and sent overseas, they will have a little bit more accuracy there in terms of actually looking at that animal itself. But all animals, that will flow through now to everyone in the industry. And as we sort of go through this presentation, you'll see why that's going to add a huge sort of benefit to us. So we'll step back and we'll just look at what previously happened when a genomic bull became daughter proven. So what we can see here is year one, the bull calf is born. We would then take a sample from his ear. We would send that overseas and we would get genomic information on him. So that combined with his ancestry would be sort of where he would sit until his daughters would then come into milk and we would start to get progeny data. So that's what you can see down in that bottom one there. And you can see that the green indication in the circle there, that's when that bull had daughters first starting to milk. When we then started to think about future lactations, obviously there was an element of prediction there for the likes of fertility, total longevity, and those traits that do take a bit longer to mature. So that was all sort of helped to be predicted with progeny data combined with the ancestry. There was no genomics in the BW once the bull reached 75% reliability. So basically, once he hit that 75% reliability, was eligible for the RAS list, all genomics was effectively what we call washed out, and it was just progeny data being added in. Now what currently happens, it's basically the same for those first 4 years. So you can see we've got the year one, and then we've got the 2, 3, and 4. They all look the same as the previous slide. What has changed is basically how we utilize genomic data once a bull's daughters have come into milk. So you remember what I said previously, that once a bull would hit 75%, all genomics would be taken out of the bull's BW. That now doesn't happen. So basically there is an element of genomics left in a bull's BW. And I guess you'll ask the question, well, why is that? And the simple answer is because of the huge value that it adds to an animal's genetic proof, especially to those slower maturing traits. So if we think about the 8 traits that go into BW, 2 of them, fertility and residual survival. So those 2 combined together do have a significant weighting in BW. We have to ask ourselves the question, realistically, how long do we know a bull's daughters are going to survive if they've only just entered the herd at 2 years old? And how do we know how fertile a bull's daughters will be when realistically they're only going to have sort of 1 mating record when that bull first graduates? So by actually keeping an element of genomics in BW, using the links that we saw in that genomic tree, it actually allows us to better predict a bull's true genetic merit. And therefore, that allows LIC to basically select better bulls to go out into the industry. And also it allows you guys as farmers to select better cows to breed from. So you'll see down that bottom line of that table there, we've got ancestry plus genomics plus the phenotypes, or that's just basically the production data that is all feeding into that bull's BW. We got the query, what does genomics look like as it's sort of been, what's its proportion in certain traits in BW? So I talked about the 8 traits in BW before. I talked about fertility and residual survival. This is looking at another 2 here. So we've got fat and protein, 2 of our production traits. What we can see here is that black line indicates when a bull's daughters first come into milk. So anything to the left of that black line is the daughters haven't yet had any production data. Anything to the right, the bull's daughters are starting to produce. So it's no surprise that you see that the genomics, which is the dark blue, it does actually diminish in these 2 BVs quite quickly. And that makes sense if we think about it. In the sire proving scheme, all daughters have to be herd tested 4 times a year. So we're getting a good amount of data on these bull's daughters. We're actually, we're getting progeny data, and we know we actually know what they're producing, and therefore we can link that back to the bull's BW. You'll see by the time they've completed their second lactation, so you can see there's still a little bit left in there as we sort of come down to that year 4, there's a very small influence left once we get further on in lactation. What we do have to remember is I'm going to come back again to the survival trait and the fertility trait. These two take a little bit longer to mature. So you'll see it's a little bit different if we think about this photo compared to this one here. And it actually makes a lot of sense when we think about what these two breeding values are telling us. So total longevity, we think about, okay, how long are a bull's daughters going to last in the herd? We don't know that when she's 2 years old, but actually obviously progresses further and further. We get more real data. So that's why the amount of genomics in the longevity genetic breeding value takes a little bit longer to diminish than the likes of fat and protein. So we think about fat and protein, cows have been herd tested 4 times a year. Total longevity, basically it asks, are they lasting from 1st to 2nd, 1st to 3rd, 1st to 4th, 1st to 5th? And that's why you can see it takes a lot longer till that genomic information flows out. The same with fertility, not quite to the same extent as total longevity, but you can see it takes a little bit longer because we are accumulating those fertility records. We're looking at when these bulls' daughters are being mated and then when they're calving as well. So obviously the more times that happens, the more accurate our fertility BB gets. But having the genomics in there makes it a whole lot more accurate than just having that basically the ancestry parent average and just with only a few records. So combining genomics, especially into these two BBs, is where we really start to see some of those great benefits. And I guess one of the main questions we get asked is, that's all well and good, the theory is all great, but can you actually prove it? Can you show us that genomics is working? And so what I'm going to show in the next couple of slides is just that. The proof is in the proof. And what I mean by that is this is actually looking at daughters previous to any production records being obtained. And then it's looking at daughters after production records have been obtained. What it is important to remember is that the genomic tool or genomics itself, it's about improving a selection of a team of bulls. It's not so much about identifying the next superstar bull. So that's why you'll sort of often hear your LIC agri manager or us in the genetics team or in LIC. It's really about using that range of bulls over your herd, not going hard on 1 or 2 bulls in your herd. So that's dangerous no matter what, if you're using a genomic bull or a daughter-proven bull. Using a team of bulls is the best sort of way for genetic improvement in your herd, because you can think about, hey, one may diminish, and we all would have experienced that. We all would experience a bull that we used, hey, maybe he came down a little bit lower as he got a bit older, as those daughters started maturing. But on the other end, we also would have experienced those ones that maybe the bull was sort of middle of the range and he actually came up. So that's the whole thought about the average shouldn't change. But yeah, just being careful that we're not sort of picking one bull to use over our herd. And few of you may laugh, but you do hear of it being done. So this one here is our rank, our 2017 bulls change in rank if we look at their BW. So I'll just talk you through it. Our 2017 code bulls are the latest bulls that have graduated. So in our Holstein Friesians, they are our 117, our Jerseys are our 317, and our Kiwi Cross are our 517. And that's just the first 3 numbers of their AB code. So a couple of you may know, so if we think about Arrow, Flint, Proclaimer, this is the cohort we're talking about here. The top row of each of these tables shows these bulls previous to any daughter information coming in. And what I've simply done is split them into quartiles. So split them evenly between 4. The bottom line is them ranked on BW. So I basically kept their same color and then ranked them. This is at the 12th of February. So you can think most of these daughters would have had 2 herd tests, and that was their current rank. And I guess what you can see is that by and large, everything is looking like it's mostly staying in those quartiles, especially up the top, the top end there. So you look at those green bulls, a lot of those green bulls are still ranking in the top quartile. Yes, we're going to get the odd one that goes down, but I mean, like looking at the Friesians, for example, there are none of those top bulls there actually fell, or that top quartile fell below the top 2 quartiles. So that's a really good story. The same thing happened in Jersey. And if we look at Kiwi Cross, there was just one outlier there that did go down a little bit lower. But by and large, you can see that, hey, everything is actually staying in those quartiles. So this is really good to see. And it's, and I suppose the other good thing as well is that majority of the likes of our premier size products, if we think about our Ford Pack products, our A2 products, and our sex semen, those two bulls are coming from, or the bulls that are in those teams, a majority of them are coming from those upper two quartiles over the three breeds. We do know that BW is our primary selection index, but a cow is not much good if she's got a good BW, but her udder is on the ground. So I guess this is what this is what I'm trying to show here is some TOP traits. This is udder overall. And as you can see, the same concept applies. The top line previous to having any TOP information, the bottom line is when probably each of these bulls would have had between 70 and 80 daughters with TOP information. And again, it paints a really good picture here. You can see that majority of our greens, our oranges, our blues, and our yellows. Probably a really good breed to look at here is the Jersey. They've done exceptionally well. You can see most of them are staying in those quartiles. Overall, a very good photo. And again, showing that genomics is, especially around these TOP traits, is really having some value in that pre-selection when we're marketing a lot of these bulls without daughter information. Dairy conformation, so this is the last one we'll touch on here with these pictures. So dairy conformation, this is including the traits like capacity, rump angle, rump width, legs as well. So all those sort of traits, I suppose, that the physical traits of the cow minus her udder. And again, a similar photo. So we can see that those greens are staying in that top quartile. A few of those yellows are down, the yellows are generally staying down that bottom end there. So you may, I guess, one of those questions may come around, well, why are you buying those yellow bulls? And I guess what we need to think about, every bull purchase decision, it's made on what is this bull adding, what are his benefits, but what are his weaknesses, and everything is it's a balanced approach. So that's the end of the genomic section. What we're going to move on to now is, while I'm just sort of titled the section, the differences in BW. So basically, if we think about what was reported in the Dairy NZ technical series back in April last year, April 2020, this was a quote saying, LIC evaluations benefit from the inclusion of genomic information. NZAEL will make use of genomic information to improve the accuracy of BW in the second stage of this upgrade planned for February 2021. Now, while this is taking a little bit longer than expected at the NZAEL side, it's really good to have the backing of Dairy NZ and NZAEL to reinforce the message that the importance of genomics is going to have in the future of the dairy industry, and especially through those increased rates of genetic gain. So given that LIC have genomic data and the reported BWs that you can get in Minder, and NZAEL don't, it has caused a little bit of confusion, which I'm going to look to sort of dispel in the next sort of couple of slides, and then we're going to actually work through an example of a well-proven bull to show where those differences are coming from. This is going to be from a very high level point of view. This is probably one of the easiest ways I've shown this, and I have to thank Rach for providing the snapshot here. So if we think about first off the NZAEL calculation method of breeding values. So we've got two inputs here. We've got phenotypic data. So that is sort of what we see that when a cow's milking, that is consisting of something from the cow's genetics. So a portion of that is going to come from the genetics of the cow herself. And then we're going to get a portion from non-genetic factors. So some of these, for example, could be environment and fixed effects. So to basically know how much a bull, if we think about it from a bull point of view, how much he is passing on to his daughters, we need to remove those non-genetic effects, and we just need to be left with the genetic effects to know how good the genetics are. So NZAEL will use pedigree and phenotypic data to estimate these environmental effects, and then it's going to give a breeding value as I'm going to show in this little animation here. So basically, so the pedigree data, so all the stuff in the background of every animal, as well as the phenotypic data, so the herd testing data and all that, that all feeds into what we call the black box. This is where all these very complex calculations are made. The non-genetic factors are removed, and then a breeding value is produced. You know, the question marks are showing, hey, look, there is, we are only estimating. It is an estimate. Obviously, one of those things, as we get more and more information, those estimates become more and more reliable. But we've got to remember we're dealing with a biological product here. If it was as easy as we would hope, I suppose it wouldn't be any fun. So that's why we always get those, it is just an estimate. And as you'll see in the next slide, genomics can sort of help improve the accuracy of that estimate. So that one there is the NZAEL calculation method. What we've now got, I've just got A plus B equals, that's our estimate, and then it's going to enter our BBs. This one here is the LIC calculation method. So what you can see is we're still using NZAEL pedigree data. We're still using NZAEL phenotypic data, but we're also going to add in some genomic data into our black box. So into our black box, it's going to calculate those non-genetic effects. It's going to remove them, and then we're going to be left with the genetic effects that's going to actually pass through, hopefully, to some very good daughters. So incorporating genomic data allows for better estimation of those non-genetic effects, and therefore allows better estimation of the genetic component. Basically, what we've got to think is that because there is another data input in the LIC model, this means there will be subtle differences in the final calculation. And the reason for that difference is because we do have that additional input. So if you want to think about it, it's like the ingredients of a cake. So if we've got 2 ingredients, like we had in the NZAEL calculation method, and then we add a 3rd ingredient, like we do in the LIC calculation method. So let's say this 3rd ingredient is something subtle, like salt. So the final outcome, it's going to be very similar, but in a cake's point of view, it's going to taste slightly different. So I guess what I wanted to sort of portray here is they are similar, but because we are adding in, or because there is another input from the LIC calculation method, that's why we're always going to get that slightly different output, because we are feeding in more data. And hopefully that makes sense here. So I'm going to work through this bowl here. So this is Integrity 311013 Hall of Fame sire. Many of you guys will be familiar, and hopefully many of you will be milking Integrity daughters or Integrity granddaughters through. He has got a whole lot of sons and still has a lot of sons in our premier sires team. So this was taken from the latest AE run. So you can see up the top line there, we've got the LIC BW and then each of the 8 BW traits there. At the end, we've also got the daughters, the amount of daughters he has. So a lot of daughters for that bowl, 25,119. The second line down there is the NZAEL BW. So that's the one you can get off the Dairy NZ website. And you can see throughout those production traits, it is very similar. So as a bull gets more and more daughters, the influence of genomics will get, it will diminish, as I talked about right at the start there. In the case that we've got here, Integrity, he's got many daughters. He's got lots of sons. And of course, those sons are going to have lots of daughters of their own. Many of these animals will have also been genotyped. So there's a whole big pool of genotyped data. Again, we've got to remember that genomics is additional information on top of ancestry and that phenotypic. So that word phenotypic meaning that what we see data. If we look across the breeding values, we can see some very subtle differences. So in this case, in this bull here, Integrity, in his case, incorporating genomic information is saying that his NZAEL genetic proof has been overestimated by 13 BW. And I suppose the reason we can come to that conclusion is, again, because we've had that genomics, that extra input added in there, and we can think about the extra information those genomics are telling us. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense if we think about those last couple of slides, the additional input into the LIC model, and why we will see some differences, even in a bull like Integrity, who is very well proven. And I guess I'd also just like to reiterate, this is definitely going to keep growing and growing genomics. It's really good to again have Dairy NZ and NZAEL's backing on how important genomics is going to be to the industry. We're seeing in LIC a lot more people are getting excited about genomics, which is real cool, because if we think about it from a genetic gain point of view, if we're wanting better cows and better quality cows, it's no doubt that genomics definitely has a big part to play in that. So moving on now to sex semen. So sex semen has gained popularity, especially over the last couple of years, but there's always, I suppose, people are wondering about that conception rate. So liquid sex semen has very comparable conception rates to conventional liquid products. So we say on average, -5% non-return rate. Frozen sexed, however, we did do a trial back in 2017 This was a blind trial. So basically when I say blind trial, the only people that knew which straws were sexed and which straws were not sexed were basically the LIC lab staff. Farmers signed up to this trial, obviously, knowing that they potentially could see some differences in non-return rate. So let's just say we had a bull like Beamer. There may have been 20 straws of Beamer dispatched. 10 of them may have been sexed and 10 of them may have been just conventional. What these farmers had to do was agree to do pregnancy testing and so on and so forth in order to get this data. After everything was collated, frozen sex trial data did show a reduction of 13.3% in non-return rate when compared to conventional frozen semen. That is quite a bit, but I mean, hey, look, if you're paying careful attention to cow health, making sure those cows that are going to sex semen, like we say with our fresh product, making sure they've had pre-mating heats, they've calved for 6 weeks, they've got no lameness, no mastitis, etc. I would definitely hope that you might see a little bit more of an improvement on that if you were to use frozen. But I guess, hey, look, that's what was shown in the trial there with farmers just obviously knowing that in the back of their minds. We always say with both frozen and both liquid sex products to really make sure your cows are in optimal condition to go to this. I mean, it is a bit more expensive, but I guess what we always do need to remember is that fresh is best. And that's the easiest one. That's the one where you're going to get the best in calf rates. We're just going to step back a little bit into some case study data. So in 2019, the St. Peter's School, our farm, and the Lincoln University Dairy Farm incorporated fresh sex semen into their mating programs. So our farm is based in Cambridge, and you can see a little bit of a table here of their semen use. So they had conventional semen, liquid sex semen, SGL dairy. They had a bit of Wagyu there, and then you can see their totals down the bottom. So in this case, the sex semen mating criteria for this farm was their cows had to be in the top 75% on BW. They had to be free from any health issues, so somatic cell, mastitis, lameness, etc. Their age, they had to be in 2 to 8 years. They'd have had to have a pre-mating heat, and it was about mating the best cows on the day that matched the above criteria. As you can imagine, because liquid sex semen, it is a fresh product. It is, if you want to use the term bull of the day, don't always know what cows are going to come on that day. So the best cows on the day were mated. Hey, look, in this case here, we actually see a very, sex semen was actually slightly higher than conventional semen. And I have no doubt that is because, of that very stringent mating criteria. And that's why I can't emphasize enough that it's so important to make sure that your cows going to sex semen are in the most optimal health condition. You'll see SGL dairy had quite a, I suppose in comparison to the other products, a relatively poor conception rate. You'll see that there's a little bit of a caveat down the bottom there saying that, hey, SGL dairy was used from week 7 to 12 because they generally were the cows that were hardest to get in calf. Obviously, that's why they're returning. They're generally less fertile, which is why we do see that little bit of a decrease in conception rate. Moving on to Lincoln University Dairy Farm. So again, I'm showing a very similar story to that of our farm. Again, you've got to remember these two are trial farms. These were, everything is going exactly as well as it can go on these two farms here. So while they do look like, that they are very good conception rates there, just keep in mind that, hey, these things were, everything was stuck to as stringent as possible. Again, we do see a little bit of a reduction in that SGL dairy conception rate as well. Just wanted to bring it back now to our premier size differential. So I just wanted to do a little bit of myth busting. I have had this query. I was actually down in Southland last week, and I would have had it probably 3 or 4 times, people asking me, well, what about these sex teams? How do you select these sex teams? I've always thought they're tier 2 bulls. And I'm going to be the first one to come out and say that is what they used to be before sex got so big. Now they are absolutely a tier 1 product. And you can see this when we compare our 3 sex semen teams to the likes of our Ford pack teams. So you can see they're a very comparable BW. You are not losing any genetic gain by going to sex semen. You can see, a few may be asking, well, why is the Holstein Friesian so different to the likes of the Ford pack BW? The reason behind that is our sex teams are also all A2. So they only contain A2 bulls. The Holstein Friesian Ford pack, that also contains A1 bulls. And it's always a little bit tougher in Holstein Friesian because the A2 gene is not quite as prevalent in the Frisian population compared to the likes of Jersey and Kiwi Cross. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get on. So this slide's quite a good one here. So this is looking at just, hey, the lighter blue is showing the BW spread of a herd. And typically that long tail is to be honest, quite a fair representation of many herds around the country. So if you are using sex semen, my question to you would be, you don't want to be spending money rearing a calf out of, say, a negative 80 BW cow compared to something like an 120 BW cow. So because, we've got to remember we have hit cow peak in New Zealand, it's about milking the best cows, and therefore we want to be breeding from our best. So with a 200, with a 200 BW difference between that negative 80 and that 120, I definitely know what cow I'd be picking from. And this graph just illustrates it really well, that we really just want to be making sure we're using sex semen over our top cows. Whether that has to be just dropping the bottom 10% or the bottom 15% out of our herd, we just want to make sure we're using it on those better cows. And I suppose in conjunction with that, we actually have an offer going with our liquid sex semen. So for every liquid sex straw purchase, you will get a liquid SGL Hereford straw for $10 on the cow. So that's SGL Hereford in premier size. Or you have the option of getting the insemination cost credited back of the following 8 beef products. So what we've got to remember as well is sex semen, yes, it is a little bit more expensive, but if we think about dropping out those bottom cows in our herd and putting a cheaper beef straw in them, we actually, to a degree, will offset a lot of that cost. We've got to remember as well, with these beef calves, we're creating another revenue stream. So a lot of those popular beef breeds down there that we've added in, Profit Maker, Charolais, Belgian Blue, Speckle Park, all ones that are talked about a lot at the moment, and that are a lot of them are fetching good money at the sales, and also there are those faster growth rate breeds as well. So frozen sex. So hey, look, I did mention at the start of the sex sort of piece here that we did have that negative 13.3% non-return rate. We do have frozen sex available this year. This is the first year we have brought it back on a number of our elite sires. Keep in mind that non-return rate difference, like I said, is if you're really selecting those cows as well as you can, and you're using your frozen sex, maybe, I probably wouldn't go using it on your cows that are too hard to get in calf. You may see a little bit of a decrease in non-return rate. We've got to remember that negative 13 was an average. There were definitely ones better, but there were definitely ones worse as well. So keep in mind that non-return rate difference. In our alpha nominated catalogue, bulls that are available on frozen sex semen are shown by this little 4M symbol. So you've got Sakoon there, who's one of our genomic Holstein Friesian bulls, and then we've got Arrow on the right there. So look for that little 4M flag. Feel free to contact your LIC Agri Manager as well if you're a little bit confused, and we can talk you through what options you have in frozen sexed. I guess the benefit to frozen sexed is you can basically do Arrow's one of our top Friesian bulls. You can basically have Arrow sex in the tank for when maybe your top cow comes on. So that is the benefit to frozen sexed. Right, moving on now, the last bit, and then we'll wrap it up. So this is A2. So obviously A2 has been a very hot topic in the last couple of years. And I guess I just wanted to touch on just what we're doing in terms of the breeding scheme here. Hopefully you also saw before in our premier size teams, you don't actually you don't lose any genetic gain by going A2. All our sex semen teams are A2. Our Jersey Ford pack and our Kiwi Cross Ford pack are also A2, all A2. So that just makes it easy from that point of view. We're definitely putting an emphasis on A2 in our breeding program. So if you look at this here, look back in 2017 on those Holstein Friesians, 46% of the cohort, or the cohort that entered the sire proving scheme, were A2. That's gone up another 10% to 2020, and then it's going to go up even further to those 2021s that were purchased last year. Look at that, that huge increase in Kiwi Cross, so 54% up to 78% in 2020. And then the ones that will be entering the sire proving scheme this year, our 2021 codes, 95% of those are A2. So a lot of good A2 bulls are on the way. Also good to see that in the Kiwi Cross, no A1s have been purchased for quite some time. Jersey, so if we look again, no A1 bulls have been purchased for quite some time. And Jersey is one of those ones where the A2 gene is very prevalent, so it's quite common. So even for an A1, A2 Jersey to be purchased, he has to be very, very good. You can say 98% in 2021, those ones will be entering the sire proving scheme this year. That's just a little bit of a reiteration that we're making sure that we are doing our bit. For A2, we know that it's a growing product, and it's, we've got companies like Sinlay, Matara Valley out there that are asking for A2 as well as obviously on top of the ones of Fonterra, OCD. So we're definitely doing our bit. We're trying to make sure that we have got a nice line of good A2 sires coming through. But that is me, guys. Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully that answered a few of your questions.
Great. Thanks, Taylor. Really informative session. There is a question coming through.
So Taylor, just wondering if you could touch a little bit on what we're doing in the inbreeding space to protect the industry from inbreeding. We've just had a few chats there online around that, and recognising that there seems to be a lot more, no doubt, beeps on the data mates that our technicians use. So just if you could maybe touch on that. We have put some commentary in the chats as well, but I thought it might be quite good if you could just touch on it too.
Yep, no, thanks for that, Rach. Yes, obviously, inbreeding is one of those very important things that we look to protect, and those that do use our technician service have DataMate, which is the easiest way to do that. For DIY customers, we can run inbreeding reports, and that can show you what bulls to or what not to mate your cows to. So I guess from a breeding scheme point of view, and from a premier size point of view as well, we make sure that we're not overloading our teams on any one particular sire. So if I use a Jersey example, making sure we're not putting too many integrity sons in the team, or too many terrific sons in the team. We're making sure that we also, the way that our teams are distributed, and that's actually been changed in the last couple of years with Jersey. We're making sure we're getting those more outcross bulls around. So we have a couple of bulls come through, the ones, think of Misty and things like that. They're great for the population because they are quite outcross compared to what we do see. And if we think about that sort of from a premier size product point of view, if we think about sort of from a breeding point of view, all the matings that are done, it's done to try and absolutely minimize inbreeding. We use a whole range of genomic sires. So, for example, on our breeding program, we're not just going and using 4 or 5 of the daughter-proven bulls. We're using a whole range of different sires, and that's really increased in the last couple of years to make sure that we do have that diversity coming through, especially in the Jersey and in the Friesian populations, the likes of Integrity, Terrific, and then Mint Edition and Beamer in our Friesian. So we're definitely keeping on top of it. We're keeping on top of what DataMate is doing as well. So it is one of those things that we think is very important. And obviously, the aim is always to minimise the number of beeps on farm. What about offering bulls to dairy companies that pay more for protein rather than fat? All the Friesian bulls this year are high fat and lower in protein. Realise these companies are a minority, but yep, and a very good question, Sarah. And I suppose, at the end of the day, what I suppose contributes to BW is the Fonterra VCR. So that's the one that does feed in. We have seen, obviously, fat has spiked probably a few years ago. We have seen that start to sort of come back now, the likes of protein increasing or fat decreasing, and we sort of expect in the sort of the 5 to 10 years we're trying to sort of breed for that parity, so that ideal sort of fat and protein, because I agree that we don't want to go hugely one way, because when it does who knows what's going to happen in the future, so we want to make sure we can sort of cover those bases. There are a few bulls, like you're saying, the Friesian bulls that are higher in fat and lower in protein. I suppose what I'd also say is there also are a lot of Friesian bulls there that are the same, so very similar in the likes of fat and protein. So take Lancelot, for example, and also in the likes of our genomic bulls, we are seeing a lot of them that are very similar for fat and protein values. But a very good question.